giving feedback to passive-aggressive team members is a task that most managers shy away from. But leaving poor behaviour unchecked can result in poor team dynamics and reduced productivity. So how do you deliver feedback to people that show signs and symptoms of passive aggression? Eleanor, why do so many managers actually avoid giving this kind of feedback to staff?
Because it's hard. The whole point about passive aggression is it's designed to make you feel uncomfortable, but it's also very subtle. And so managers actually find it hard to pinpoint exactly what has gone on there. It's easy to give feedback on someone being aggressive because it's obvious what they did. But when someone has just sat there sullenly not contributing in a meeting, that's a much more subtle sort of behaviour. And so often what managers are really struggling with is, how do I describe the behaviour that I want to change? And so that's really the art of giving feedback when you're dealing with passive-aggressive people, being able to find what exactly is it that they did.
Okay, and so how would managers respond to staff members who are showing these kind of symptoms?
So the first thing that they need to do is focus on incongruence. Incongruence is where there is a difference in my body language and my verbal message. Right. So I'm saying, oh, brilliant idea, Einstein. And it's really obvious from my non-verbal behaviour that I think you're an idiot. Now, the fact is that that is a very clever behaviour, because if the manager confronts me, I can say, but I said that you were really clever. That was a brilliant idea. So what the manager needs to actually do is focus on that incongruence and make it explicit. And we do that by using a technique called recipe for transparency, where we basically play back the behaviour and we say, when I suggested the change in procedures, you rolled your eyes, you looked up at the ceiling, you turned away, and you said in a sarcastic tone of voice, brilliant idea, Einstein. And that gave me the impression that you thought the idea was stupid. Right. Is that what you mean? Now, obviously, if you're passive-aggressive, you're not going to say, yeah, that was what I meant. You'll probably go, oh no, there was a spider on the ceiling, I was just a bit distracted. And so what the manager then needs to come back with is a response that sets a boundary. So that will be a response like, well, you need to be aware that if you're looking at the ceiling and talking in that tone of voice, those two components of your body language send a very clear message that you don't agree. And in future, if you combine those sorts of meta messages again, I'm going to confront you and I'm going to ask you to explain what's going on.
What should a manager do with a staff member that is displaying passive-aggressive symptoms when they're actually receiving the feedback from you?
Yeah, and that can be a nightmare. So there you are, giving them the feedback, and what they'll typically do is sit back and hunch over and refuse to respond. And you actually need to make this a live example of the behaviour in the here and now and actually call them out and say, well, I noticed that you're slouching over right now, and I noticed the tone of your voice right now is slightly sarcastic, or I noticed you're refusing to respond in more than one word answers. And I'm concerned about that because it's expected that you participate in our team and that you take feedback as part of your everyday work.
It sounds like a lot of hard work. Why should managers really take the effort to learn how to deal with this kind of behaviour?
Yeah, and quite often they want to just pass it on to HR. But it's part of the manager's role to be accountable for making sure there's positive team dynamics and positive behaviours on teams. So from a purely professional perspective, it's part of your job. Secondly, if you leave this sort of behaviour unchecked, it's definitely going to get worse over time. So you're better off starting early and stopping it in its tracks rather than allowing the behaviour to become more and more toxic over time.
Eleanor, that's great advice. Now, where can HR professionals go to get more information about passive aggression? I know you've got some tip sheets and that on your website. Where can they go specifically?
Yeah, so they can have a look on my website, www.difficultpeoplemadeeasy.com.au, or there's a whole chapter dedicated to these sorts of behaviours in my book, so they could have a look at that chapter, or they could give me a call and I'm quite happy to talk them through options for coaching and training.
Eleanor, thank you so much for sharing your expertise today. That advice is going to be invaluable to HR professionals. Now, I'm going to be catching up with you next month. What are we going to be talking about?
We're going to look at what HR practitioners should do when managers come to you and ask you to take on the job of giving feedback to their staff because they don't know how to do the job themselves.